I'm leaving the cafe to Sally. Better her than you. Tony, the husband, says this with absolute confidence. Sally, the daughter-in-law he's talking about, nods with joy. Who does he think he is? He knows nothing about this business. Tony seems delighted, almost as if he's the one running the show. Maybe because he's been playing the role of the cafe owner. I was foolish to have trusted Tony like this. I've got to cut the dead weight. My name is Lucy, a homemaker in my 60s. I live with Tony, and we have a son named John, who married Sally a few years ago. They live close by. John and Sally are important to me, but there's something else that means even more to me. Our family cafe. We've inherited this business through generations, since the town was scarcely populated. We're the current owners of the cafe. The coffee we've been brewing for generations is loved by the locals. Some even ask me to teach them how to make it. Each time they ask, I feel thrilled, and it's almost a pity I can't share the secret. Running this cafe is like a sanctuary for my soul. It's comforting to be surrounded by just the right amount of customers, cook their orders, and serve them. This time is priceless, to say the least. But Tony and I have divergent feelings about the cafe. Tony does handle the administrative side of the cafe, but hardly ever shows up at the place. Why do I have to be at the cafe? Isn't that your job? He would say, essentially neglecting his duties. He's not the Tony I married. Back then, he was all in, saying, let's both work hard on running the cafe. I remember feeling so supported, but after a few months of marriage, Tony lost all interest in the cafe. He never showed up there and seemed to only care about the money it made. How much should we make this month? Can't be much coming from that old shop, huh? It was hard not to be angry when Tony laughed like that. But if I spoke up, I was sure we'd end up fighting. So I stayed silent. Tony was overly concerned about the cafe's earnings, and when he learned how much we made, he tried to pocket it all for himself. The earnings from the cafe are for future expenses, so keep your hands off. Even if I told Tony that, he'd say, it's my shop, so I can take the money if I want to. Stop worrying about small stuff. And he'd take all the profits when I wasn't looking. Tony knew where I kept my banking card. Even if I hid it, he'd find it quickly and take whatever money I had. Thanks to this, I had no extra money left. Tony used all the cafe's profits as his play money and lived lavishly. We'll run this business together as husband and wife, he had said, but those words quickly turned into lies. It was unbearably painful. Please, I want us to manage our finances properly, I pleaded with Tony, but he never listened. Who do you think you are, getting all uppity? He'd scoff. My opinion was never heard, and I was forced to endure. Why, despite all my efforts, was I not rewarded? Why was I only met with suffering? No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find the answer. The only reason I hadn't given in to despair was because of the cafe. Going to the cafe and working helped me forget all my troubles. If I looked down, customers would notice right away and say, is something wrong? Want to talk about it? Though it was a relationship between the shop owner and customer, those words felt incredibly warm, and it was all I could do to hold back tears. I was resolved to protect this shop at all costs. I'll do whatever I can for this cafe. I swore this from the bottom of my heart, and that vow remains unchanged. To me, this cafe is the most important thing, and my only solace. Yet, relentlessly, the hardships kept coming. There was one more issue I had with Tony. It was how he treated Sally, my daughter-in-law. Sally, do you have enough money? We have some to spare, so don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, Tony. We're good. John is doing his best. Every month, our son and his wife come to visit us at home. John says it's because he worries about us being alone. From the moment John introduced us, Tony took a liking to Sally. He asked about more than just her career, her favorite type of person, hobbies, and how she likes to spend her holidays. I'm so happy someone as wonderful as Sally is marrying John. I hope we can be close, too. Tony was clearly smitten. The way he spoke gave it away. John noticed this and never intentionally let Sally get too close to Tony. Originally, the monthly visits were supposed to be just John. However, Sally insisted. Tony and his family are important to me too, so I want to be involved. As expected, now that Sally came along every month, Tony was overjoyed. Sally, is there anything you want? Our wedding anniversary is coming up, isn't it? Sally, do you have any free days this month? I found a great place, and I'd like to take you there. If someone as beautiful as Sally ran a cafe, customers would be thrilled. The way Tony pressed on made it impossible for Sally to feel comfortable. Really? That's so kind of you. Tony, you're such a nice guy. Sally wasn't helping. She could have simply said no, but instead led Tony on. Once Sally responded positively, Tony didn't hold back. He piled on the transparent compliments and escalated his approach to her. Both John and I felt uncomfortable with Tony's behavior. Above all, John was having a hard time. The woman he chose was getting too close to his father. To give John a breather, we'd sometimes go to a cafe and work together, ignoring Tony's actions. But Tony would nullify all our efforts with his action. That day was also one when our son and his wife would visit. But Tony's demeanor was a bit different today. He frequently looked over at me, a serious expression on his face. "Just a moment, I need to talk to everyone here," Tony announced. His voice was so somber that we all sat down to listen. "I can't take it anymore." Tony began speaking as soon as he opened his mouth. "What can't you take?" John asked, and Tony let it all out. "Lucy's attitude is unbearable. She acts as if she owns the cafe, not letting me manage the profits. Even though I'm the one who owns the cafe, she looks at me as if I'm useless. It hurts me every time I see that. If Lucy doesn't change, I can't go on like this." I was shocked by Tony's words. Why did I have to hear something like that? Wasn't it Tony who walked out on the cafe we decided to run together? I held back my urge to confront him, seeing he still had more to say. Then Tony dropped a bombshell. "I'm giving my cafe to Sally. She's a better choice than you anyway." I blurted out, "What? Why would he make a decision about our joint cafe all on his own? Shouldn't he be consulting me first?" Meanwhile, Sally, who had been named as the new owner, looked thrilled. "I'm honored to take on this role from Tony. Please, come by sometime," she said cheerfully. Observing her composure, I got the full picture. This had been her agenda all along. To steal my precious cafe. That was her goal. Why hadn't I seen this coming sooner? If I had, maybe I could have taken steps to prevent this whole debacle. I was so shocked by their words, I found myself speechless. Why was I being pushed into such a tight corner? What had I done to deserve this? My heart was filled with a strong desire for revenge. I must make them regret this, I thought. And I didn't waste time. As I tried to speak up, saying, "Well, about that," Tony gave me a look as if to say, "Got a problem?" Unfazed, I presented the facts. "The legal owner of the cafe is me. My grandfather started it. How exactly were you planning on handing it over? You have no legal ties to the cafe." At my words, Sally exclaimed, "What?" Just as I'd suspected, she had been kept in the dark. Tony had no right to decide anything about the cafe, because I was the one who had been running it. Of course, transferring the shop to someone else is impossible without my consent. For Tony to even suggest giving it to Sally, he must be operating under some serious misconceptions. "You did say we were co-managing the shop, didn't you? Doesn't that make me part owner too?" "I did say that, and I even tried to transfer the title to you. But when I suggested doing the paperwork, you didn't want to, remember? That's on you." When we first got married, I had intended to give Tony ownership of the shop, but the one who refused was unmistakably Tony. Seeing Tony go pale, as if he'd forgotten all that, I can't help but chuckle at him. When was the last time I saw Tony this deflated? But Sally stood up, as if to defend Tony. "Lucy, that's too harsh. Poor Tony." Saying that, Sally stepped in front of Tony, as if shielding him. Watching her, Tony said, "Sally," in a voice that sounded relieved. Tony was thinking of me when he did this, so please stop blaming him. Sally defends Tony with all her might. John looks at her as if he's dumbfounded. Are we done here? I ask, and John nods. Taking that as a cue, I retrieved an envelope from the bedroom. What's that? Sally and Tony look at me suspiciously, wondering what's inside. This contains evidence that backs up your relationship. Saying that, I spread the contents all over the table. Several photographs spill out. All feature Sally and Tony, clearly indicating their intimate relationship. You two were more than just in-laws. You had a romantic relationship, didn't you? As I say that, showing the photos, Sally glares at me, her face filled with rage. How can you be so cruel? Do you enjoy hurting people? Sally vehemently accuses me, and Tony joins in. What are you saying Sally and I did? We were just good friends. What's wrong with that? Looking at the two protest so vehemently, both John and I let out a big sigh. I started suspecting Sally and Tony's relationship 2 months ago. When I consulted John about the uncomfortably close relationship between the two, he suggested, why not hire a private investigator? So I tapped into my network of friends and hired an investigator to track their activities. It appeared that 2 months was plenty of time to gather substantial evidence. They weren't very discreet. The days he said he was away on solo trips, he was actually on romantic getaways. The money taken from the cafe was being used to buy her gifts. I deeply regretted not starting the investigation sooner. I first showed the findings to John. Upon seeing them, John became furious, and his feelings for Sally cooled. We agreed to keep these findings a secret for now, until a moment so definitive came that divorce felt absolutely necessary. Well, that moment had arrived. Sally, my feelings for you have waned. Let's get a divorce. John relayed this to Sally. Her face, once filled with anger, immediately turned pale. No way. This is a joke, right? Divorce? Over just this? Cheating is a blatant betrayal. I can't continue this marriage. With those sharp words from John, Sally crumbled weakly onto the floor. Tony, watching all this, wore a worried expression. Sally, it's okay. I'm here for you, even if John has abandoned you. Tony desperately tried to console a devastated Sally. Ignoring Tony, Sally's face continued to pale. But the revenge wasn't over. I had no intention of letting them support each other. Just so you know, we're getting a divorce too. Upon hearing this, Tony blurted out, What? And stared at me. Tony actually depended on me. He couldn't afford to get divorced. He had already quit his job and was living on a pension. Had he saved money while he was working, things would have been different. But spendthrift Tony had no financial cushion. The only reason he'd been getting by was because of the cafe's earnings. Contrary to what he said about it being an old cafe, it's actually one of the most popular spots in town now, bringing in good money. If we divorce, he would lose that income. In short, Tony's life would plunge further into hardship. Please, don't divorce me! I won't be able to cope! You planned on supporting Sally, right? I can't keep up with a Tony who cheats. My patience isn't endless. I had no obligation to show mercy to Tony, who was getting increasingly desperate. For years, Tony had continually betrayed me. I owed him no favors. That day, I was finally able to let go of the heavy burden named Tony. Though he resisted a lot, the divorce went through. At the same time, my son and his wife were also able to finalize their divorce. Both John and I sued Tony and Sally for alimony, and rightfully so. They'd been cheating. However, both of them resisted paying, claiming they couldn't afford the alimony. Well, that resistance turned out to be futile. Apparently, Tony now lives alone in an old apartment, abandoned by Sally. Sally is young. She probably planned to leverage her beauty and move on. But John wouldn't allow that. As soon as he contacted her parents, they took her back. She's now working her tail off to repay her parents, who covered the alimony. As for Tony, he didn't have the means to pay, and ended up in debt. On my end, the reduction in stress significantly elevated my focus on running my cafe. With my newfound financial stability, I renovated the cafe and the atmosphere got rave reviews from customers. Sometimes John comes by and helps out with the business. Despite everything that's happened, John has always stood by me. I want to live the rest of my life with such a kind person as John.